Askreddit. What's the creepiest unsolved mystery? This story might not be creepy to other people, but it's something that happened in my house. So it is definitely creepy to me. I posted this in another thread a while back, and a lot of people found it as odd as I do. So that's why I'm posting it. I live in a row house built in the 1880s in Baltimore, Maryland. Back in 1912, the owner of the house, Anthony Wahl, age 65, committed suicide by hanging in the basement. Anthony, who was wheelchair-bound, somehow got down these stairs. He then somehow hanged himself by attaching clothesline to the rafters. His wife, who had gone shopping at the market, was only gone for a half an hour. She left Anthony in the parlor of the home, located in the front of the house. For Anthony to have gotten to the basement stairs, he would have had to wheel himself back a long hallway in the house and then wheel back down a long brick walkway to get to the bulkhead. He would have also had to open the bulkhead to get down the stairs. My mom, who's in her 70s but rather nimble, had problems opening the bulkhead by herself without my help. Anthony and his wife, Fanny, were supposed to go to the country for a visit later that afternoon, and he was reportedly in good spirits. When Fanny returned from the market, she asked Fanny, their servant, who had only been hired the previous day, if she had seen him. They then went on to search the house. Fanny, the wife, I know the names are confusing, went to the basement and found poor Anthony. I did a bunch of research into the family, but it's a doozy of a story that I won't go into unless there's interest. I'll edit this post, if so. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the family, which was a prominent part of the community and very wealthy. They owned several properties and had a very successful hat business. I used to work as a genealogist and worked in history museums, and I have spent entirely too long on this story. Either it's a horribly sad story or something more sinister happened. There are also other suicides and mental health issues that affected the family, however. They all happened after this event. In fact, his nephew that we was named after him eventually spent decades in a state hospital, mental health. I doubt I'll ever find out what happened, but I just can't stop wondering. Edit. This is a super long story, but you guys asked for it. The story of Anthony Wahl. Anthony Wahl was born about 1843 in Baltimore City, Maryland, and came from a family of milliners. Anthony's family owned a couple of hat stores and several properties throughout the neighborhood. They were rather wealthy and were prominent members of the community. Anthony's parents were Jacob and Johanna Wahl, both German immigrants. Jacob died in 1882 and left a huge estate to his wife. Although Anthony was the oldest child, in 1884 his mother sold the hat store to her son-in-law, George H. Boudicca, who was married to Anthony's sister Juliana. Though I couldn't find any information about what happened to the hat store after this event, I do know that George went on to open a paint store that is still around today. It was located in the next neighborhood over until it burned down last year and moved out to the county. It was a big part of the community for decades. Around that same time, Anthony opened up his own millinery and notion shop in his house. In June of 1901, the business is listed for rent due to ill health. I couldn't find any other information about the business, though. Sometime in the 1880s, Anthony married Fanny Wahl. Fanny was born in Germany in November of 1847. She too was a milliner, but there's not a ton of information about her out there. They seem to have a happy marriage, and there are several notices about trips they took together, and even a large surprise party that Anthony had for her birthday in 1906. For reasons I cannot track down, at some point Anthony ends up being wheelchair-bound. The house where they live is 3.5 stories tall and has a basement down some rather steep stairs. The basement does have low ceilings, and it is very treacherous getting down to the ground. The event. On May 7th, 1912, Fanny goes to the market early in the morning, leaving her husband with a cheery farewell. He was apparently in excellent spirits when she left, and they were both looking forward to a trip out to the country they were taking that very afternoon. She left him in the parlor and was gone not more than a half an hour. When Fanny first arrived home, she asked her servant, named Fanny and had only started working for them the day before this event, where he was, who told her she thought he had gone out. Fanny then called out for Anthony, searches upstairs, don't know why, wheelchair, and then ultimately ended up in the basement that had an exterior entrance at the end of a long, brick-lined hallway. She then found him hanging by a single clothesline flung over a beam in the basement. Fanny runs back up the stairs and back to the kitchen to grab a knife and cuts down Anthony. But it was too late. He was already dead. An overturned soapbox was found a short distance from the body, described by the Baltimore Evening Sun as a poignant suggestion as to the manner of the deed. In the meantime, Fanny, the servant, had already run a few doors down to fetch a doctor. Fanny was almost incoherent, but was able to describe her husband's earlier good spirits and her utter shock in her new reality. When Fanny first arrived home, she asked her servant, named Fanny and had only started working for them the day before this event, where he was, who told her she thought he had gone out. Fanny then called out for Anthony, searches upstairs, don't know why, wheelchair, and then ultimately ended up in the basement that had an exterior entrance at the end of a long, brick-lined hallway. She then found him hanging by a single clothesline flung over a beam in the basement. Fanny runs back up the stairs and back to the kitchen to grab a knife and cuts down Anthony. But it was too late. He was already dead. An overturned soapbox was found a short distance from the body, described by the Baltimore Evening Sun as a poignant suggestion as to the manner of the deed. In the meantime, Fanny, the servant, had already run a few doors down to fetch a doctor. Fanny was almost incoherent, but was able to describe her husband's earlier good spirits and her utter shock in her new reality. Other interesting details. In Anthony's funeral announcement, I noticed that he wasn't buried in the same cemetery as his parents, though both Juliana and her husband, George H. Budick, were in the same plot. His mother, Johanna, died in 1906. When she died, she left 2 houses to Anthony, but 5 houses to George, along with several other lots of land. I don't know if she left less to Anthony because he had no children, or if there was some other reason. I eventually tracked down that Anthony was buried in a Jewish cemetery and assumed that perhaps that is why he was almost shunned from the family. Fanny's family was Jewish. A wedding notice for Juliana and George listed a minister of the UU faith, but I don't know enough about religion to know if that would have been relevant. There are other instances that show some sort of rip in the family, but I've already droned on enough. Whatever happened in the family, it seemed to happen around the time he married Fanny, who had come from a poor immigrant Jewish family that lived in a poorer part of the city. Maybe Anthony's family looked down upon her. I just know that they really didn't end up with nearly as much wealth as his siblings. I also wonder if she felt that he was a burden, being in a wheelchair. Honestly, my mom and I have been in the basement several times trying to figure how he got down there and then how he could have actually hanged himself. It just doesn't make sense. She was supposedly only gone for a half an hour, and I just don't see a way for him to have the time to do the deed. My questions. Was Fanny resentful or didn't want to deal with him? There is a lot of evidence of depression in the Wahl family. I can provide details if needed. And perhaps he was himself depressed because of his disability and took it out on her. Maybe it was the servant that had only started with them the day before. I don't know if anyone else will read as much into this story, but it just doesn't seem that Anthony had the physical means to do it. I have dozens of articles about various things with both Anthony and Fanny's families. Here is the ancestry page for Anthony and his Fanny's that I made, as there wasn't anything about them anywhere. It contains information about Anthony's nephew, Juliana's son, Anthony Wahl Budeka, who lived in the Springfield State Hospital for a decade or 2 and was married several times. One of Fanny's nephews also committed suicide, apparently brought on my getting caught embezzling money from his boss. Obviously, I don't think I'll ever know exactly what happened. Maybe you guys can give some insight. Like and subscribe.